Hey y'all, and welcome to the MrMaple Show. Today we're going to talk about focal point planting in your landscape and garden with Japanese maples.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Tim. And we're MrMaple.com, a family mail order business. We ship directly to your door. We do over 1,000 varieties of Japanese maples. And we got a lot of those that'll make some great focal point planting. So you have to shop with us on MrMaple.com.
So let's talk a little bit about what focal point planting is. We're talking about that spot in the garden that everybody is going to get drawn to, and that is what's really going to pop. It's the focal point. It's what you want to be your showpiece. We were talking off camera before, and I'm like, it's almost kind of like your best of show.
Yeah, I mean, it is your prominent place in your garden that's going to draw a lot of interest just alone by where it is. This could be the corner of a garden space. This could be out in the center of your yard. I mean, there's a lot of areas that could be of specific and really big interest in your landscape and garden. If you look at how your walkways flow, if you look at how people are going to be traveling around your garden, how people are going to view your yard from your house and from the road.
And Japanese maples make such a great tree or plant to use as a focal point. One, you've got color, you've got texture, but also the fact that their seasonal changes allow you to say, hey, I can have more than just one focal point, that you can choose one that's going to be a spring interest. So you know in spring, this is your focal point. And then you know during the summer, this can be your focal point.
You know Japanese maples are a good focal point planting is if it's the only Japanese maple in your yard and you put one in there, that's always going to be the focal point.
Always.
Everyone's always going to look at that tree and say, man, what is that tree? I like that. I love those Japanese maples, because they steal the show. And that's what you want your focal point planting to do. If it's dynamic in its color, stands out from the rest of the garden. If it's dynamic in its shape, stands out from the rest of the garden. The texture, I mean, if you go down this list of what Japanese maples can provide, and you can find the focal point that you really like the best, the thing that makes you want to, what you want to have as the focal point in your landscape and garden. And you can find a Japanese maple for almost anyone's preferences, whether it's yellow, green, red, variegated, weeping, upright, dwarf. The list goes on because we do over 1,500 different varieties of Japanese maples at MrMaple.com. And so there's a little bit of flavor for whichever taste you prefer.
And what's great about Japanese maples as a focal point as well is, especially in today's age, the gardening landscape is forever shrinking, getting smaller. So you know that even if I have a small garden, I can still have that focal point. There's a Japanese maple out there that will fit that spot, and I can still have that. I don't need this big, grand space to do that.
So walk around your yard to figure out what the focal points are going to be in your landscape. Walk through the walkways, how people are going to see your garden. Come from your front porch walking out. What's going to be the focal point there? What's going to be the focal point from the road? And you can sort of start to figure out where you want to place some Japanese maples that'll really be dynamic and really make your garden pop.
And that leads into some of the things that you need to consider. And one of those is size. What is the size of the space you have? And what is the size of the tree that you need to use for that space?
I mean, if you've got a big open space in your front yard, you can go with a bigger tree. And how much more is a bigger tree, a tree that gets larger, gonna steal the show than a dwarf? I mean, dwarfs can really steal the show up close, but you go with some of these larger Japanese maples, these faster growing selections, and you can have a specimen out there that is just immaculate and something that everyone's gonna be drawn to.
And then you also want, again, with any type of plant that you put in the ground, is sun exposure. It's just so important. You want that tree to be healthy. You want that tree to be happy, and sun exposure is a big part of that.
Yeah, and with any Japanese maple, you want to make sure you've got good drainage. I think that's critical in trying to figure out if it's going to thrive and do well in your spot. Japanese maples are good in zones 5 through 9. So if you're in those areas, most of the time you're going to have good success with many different selections of the Japanese maples, as long as you're considering that the sun exposure, considering the drainage. And, you know, the other thing you want to consider is color, your preferences. I mean, if you've got a flashy garden, you can choose something flashy for that spot. If you don't have a garden that's very flashy and you prefer to have a more modest approach, you can go with a green Japanese maple in that spot that can give you some dynamic fall colors. And so there's a lot you can do with using Japanese maples for those focal point plantings. And a lot of that can be on your own preference. And that's what I like about it is you can actually go through and figure out what you like the best with a Japanese maple because there's so much selection to choose from. I mean, unlike any other tree, there are more varieties of Japanese maples that are distinctly different than the other tree beside of it.
And going along with the color, you want to also consider the color. What is the color of your house? What are the colors of the other plants and trees that you have in your garden or on your property? You don't want your centerpiece to get camouflage and disappear amongst all those other things. So color with that also is what is the color of the tree, so it allows it to really stand out and be that focal point.
And that's one of the things that I like about selecting different trees for certain spots. There are certain colors that are going to stand out and people will be drawn to no matter what. And you can select these with a Japanese maple and make that a focal point, even if it's not in as prominent of a position, which is very unusual. I mean, you can't do that with many other selections, with many other trees or shrubs, is make your own focal point in the garden. People will be drawn to a Japanese maple no matter where you plant it. But you've got these focal points, and if you use a Japanese maple in these focal point plantings, it's an easy way to get what you're desiring in your landscape without a lot of thought besides, can this grow well here? And, which variety do I want to pick? I mean, that's the awesome thing about Japanese maples is they're so beautiful, so easy to grow, and they're part of a low maintenance landscape that's fairly drought resistant and easy for many people to grow in the landscape. So awesome selection for a focal point planting.
So we also want to give you some recommendations of some of our favorites for those focal point plantings. And our first one that we thought of was Germain's Gyration.
The Mack truck of Japanese maples. That was Matt's quote, so I'm stealing it. It is a fast-growing green lace leaf, and I love what Germain's Gyration can do. It gets out there and makes a large weeping green lace leaf. And I say large, I mean, it can grow over a foot of growth per year in both directions, and it can get out there really quickly. We're talking in 10 years, it could be 15 to 17 foot wide, 10, 12 foot tall, twisting, contorting habits that make it a focal point when it's in leaf, but also when it's out of leaf, because you get that structure of a weeping Japanese maple, but with more twists and curves than you typically would. Gives it something visually interesting when it's in leaf, but even out of leaf, which is unusual. I mean, you don't think of a deciduous tree as providing some interest in the landscape during those winter months. And Germain's Gyration can definitely do that. I mean, some bold orange fall colors. I love Germain's Gyration. It's one of my favorite Japanese maples for getting out there and making that tree in your landscape that looks 200 years old in 10 to 20 years.
And I think that's the best part about Germain's Gyration is that it can give you that mature looking tree in a much shorter time, which just adds to that being that focal point, because you come in and you've got this big, bold, mature looking tree.
Now, guys, next up on my recommendations for a good focal point planting is a classic red upright. We're talking about Acer Palmatum Fire Glow. We could have talked about Blood Good. We could have talked about Emperor One, but we went with Fire Glow because it's got a little bit extra flair, and that's what you want in these focal point plantings. What Fire Glow does is it makes that tree 10 feet in 10 years, but it gets an orange red to the backside of the leaf. So when morning sun or afternoon sun hit it, if it's out there in the center of the yard, you're definitely going to get this. It glows. So when you're looking up into the leaves, the tree glows, and that's where it gets the name of Fire Glow. Outstanding focal point selection for a red upright.
And then you can't leave Hot Blonde off of this list as a focal point just because, well, again, like Germain's Gyration, it's got vigor to its growth. You've got yellow, and yellow is going to pop. Lightens up the garden, it's going to pop, but then you're also talking about killer fall colors, so you're getting that symphony where you're getting those different colors at different times performing their solos at different times.
Hot Blonde is a flashy focal point. I mean, you put this out there, it's going to be a yellow out there, and your eyes are naturally drawn to yellow anyways. And then you see this bright colored Japanese maple out there, y'all, next level for focal points. It's going to steal the show. And I know we use this last week when we were talking about background planting, it makes a great background plant as well. But this is a focal point, is electric. It's going to light up that garden.
And then you can't, we were talking about this list, making this up, English lace. We're talking about a more upright red lace leaf. I mean, how much more of a focal point can you talk about a tree like that kind of reaches out, but you get some height to it, and it's a lace leaf like that, just killer. And
that's the thing about English lace is it is one of the faster growing red lace leaf Japanese maples. And it grows upright at an early age, and I often stake it up to get that height. And then as it starts aging, it really starts to get some width to it. So it, again, will make a specimen out there that looks like a 200-year-old specimen in 10 to 20 years, but with a red lace leaf. It's not going to have as much of the contorted habit as Germain's gyration, just what you typically get out of a red lace leaf, but it's going to have that umbrella form and get out there with age. I mean, and it look much older than it actually is. If you're looking for a red lace leaf, English lace is the thing to go with for that focal point planting.
And then how can you deny King Mikawa as a focal point in your garden?
I think people are going to start Googling King Mikawa because we've said it so much. But we were talking about the original Mikawa Yatsubusa. I mean, the progeny are real popular, but Mikawa Yatsubusa is slow growing and it's a dwarf, but it steals the show wherever you put it, which is so unusual. Normally the dwarfs you walk by sometimes. You got to have those along a walkway. You got to have. If you put this out in the landscape, people are going to walk over to it whether there's a walkway or not.
Oh, absolutely. And I always think of, I've had the honor to see the world's largest Mikawa Yatsubusa, but it's more than, you talk about how big it is, but seeing that one at Buckles, you just naturally get drawn to it, but it's not necessarily because of the size. To see the structure of it, to see how it puts off those seeds, just all of it. It's a character in the garden. I've heard you guys talk about, it's kind of Dr. Seuss or kind of, comic booky. It really is. And it's something that once your eyes see it, you're drawn to it. And that's what you're looking for that focal point, is getting drawn to it. Mikawa does it every time.
At Maplewood Gardens, you walk in the entranceway, you walk through the pergola, down the pathway, and where the pathway splits, there's a focal point right there in the center of the yard. It's been on Fine Gardening magazine. It's been in Home and Garden magazine. It's been in numerous publications, that Mikawa Yatsubusa as a focal point right there in the yard. And it is one of those trees that you just fall in love with. The more you see it, it's often one of people's favorite Japanese maples. It was the 2014 Maple of the Year. Matt, when he was on the executive board the year before he became president, my brother, at the North American branch of the Maple Society, he implemented the Maple of the Year program, and Mikawa Yatsubusa won the first ever one. And I'm telling you, if we allowed it to win each and every year, there wouldn't be another winner because everyone would keep picking Mikawa Yatsubusa.
Well, there's a reason why Mikawa is one of our number one requested plants, or one of the most requested trees that we have. There's a reason for that, because it provides all those needs.
And while we were outside, Sean recommended this one particularly as a focal point planting, and I said, why not? We're talking about Geisha Gone Wild.
Oh, you're talking about a flashy. You got those pinks and that variegation and I've seen it with my own eyes. Went to Memphis to visit a buddy, and I took him a Geisha Gone Wild, and you can see it where he has it in his front yard as his focal point, and that variegation with those purples and those pinks. You can watch cars go past his house and slow down to look at this. Like, holy cow! It's a flashy tree. But it does that. So if you got cars, your neighbors, and people driving by slowing down to look at your tree, that is a focal point tree.
That's for sure. Geisha Gone Wild is a selection that was introduced by Buckholz Nursery. Talon Buckholz found it as a sport off the cultivar Geisha. And the unusual thing about Geisha Gone Wild is it's more vigorous than the tree that it was off of. It's a better plant, I believe. Just because it makes a better tree out in the landscape. And still gives you that pink color that seems unreal. You've got a pink margin variegation, and then you've got the red on the interior in the spring. And when you see it from a distance, it looks pink. It's going to steal the show wherever you put it, and it makes a focal point by itself. There's nothing else that's that color on a tree. You're talking just that cotton candy pink, which is crazy. So an easy focal point planting to put out there, but it is for the people who are not, it is for the people who love flair. It's for the people that love showy plants because it steals the show.
And I just want to add with all of these, as a focal planting, you can have more than one. You don't have to limit yourself in your garden to just one focal point, because again, like a symphony, you can choose one to be your focal point in spring with the spring interest. And then you can choose one to be your summer interest. You can choose one to be your fall interest. And then you can get into the coral barks that become your winter interest. You could always have a focal point going on. Doesn't always have to be the exact same tree every time, but you can have something happening all the time. And
the focal points, primarily, when you talk about focal point plantings, those are the spots in your yard that draw the most interest naturally. So your corners of your walkways, your center of your yard, like all these different angles of where you're looking at your garden, and where you're putting a Japanese maple is going to be your focal point. But if you put it in the right spots, it's easier to play and build around your garden. And often focal points are some of the first things you decide on a garden, and then you start building everything else around it. You do hardscaping, you do your walkways, and then you do your focal point planting. And Japanese maples make that focal point planting, the planting part of it, when you're planning, trying to figure out what's going to go into that planting, it makes it easy.
Absolutely.
Y'all, thanks for jumping in today on today's landscaping needs, focal point planting. I hope you enjoyed this, got something out of this on learning about focal point planting and what Japanese maples make the best. You probably noticed that we didn't put many recommendations in here for companion plants. And that's because when you're doing a focal point planting, that is going to be the thing that you want to steal the show. You don't want to put a lot of companions around these focal point plantings because you want all the eyes to go on this Japanese maple.
Hey guys, let us know what you've used as your focal point planting in the comments below. Be sure to hit that like button, and to keep supporting this channel, be sure to shop at MrMaple.com.
Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.